Hello. I want to tell you today about my current project, exploring the potential for emergent games to foster curiosity. This talk does live on my website, so if you want to go have a look at it, it's all written out and the slides are there in a PDF as well, so it's all there if you want to have a look. The talk is structured in a bunch of parts. First, a bit of background, who I am and where I come from. What I'm trying to do, which is to facilitate new knowledge alliances. How I'm trying to do this, my project, through both social and technical aspects, what I'm busy with at the moment, and where to go from there. My name is Bernal. The nick I go by on the internet is IndieBio. I was trained as a biologist and a bioprocess engineer, and I did my PhD in sanitation, or finding value from waste products, specifically the ones from our toilets. I did this in Cape Town in South Africa, which will become relevant in a minute. My interests are open culture, volunteering, DIY, that sort of stuff. I love water, I love toilets, and I am currently a little bit obsessed about the metaverse. I'm based in São Miguel in the Azores at the moment, a part of Portugal, and I'm looking for a home to explore this project through a postdoc. So my story starts here. This is a graph about the stored water levels in Cape Town from the period of 2014 through to 2018, all the way through to 2021. This was a period of an extreme drought in the Western Cape, and in some areas this is still going. What we're seeing here is the blue line representing our stored water in dams. And this is the dams that supply the city of Cape Town and some surrounding areas with water. It's a winter rainfall region, so during summer the water levels drop, and then winter should refill those dams to close to 100%. This is a winter rainfall region in the southern hemisphere, which means that the summer region, these dips are around December, January, February, and that's why the years show you, the previous one and the next one. The orange levels are water restrictions as the drought progressed. So what we're seeing is that during summer the levels drop. In 2014 it was to around 75% maybe. And then winter comes and fills it up again. By 2014-15, those levels dropped a little bit more. And by 2015-16, we were starting to think we're in trouble. And so we had some basic water restrictions, don't water the garden, those sort of things. By 2016-17, our restrictions were becoming a bit more extreme. And then what I want to focus on is this summary of 2017 and 18, where we were at our most extreme restrictions of 50 liters of water per person per day. So that was for drinking, for showering, for everything. And this was incredibly stressful because we were trying to figure out how a city of 4.5 million people could not run out of water. And then towards late March in 2018, it was announced that we were 2 weeks away from this hypothetical day zero, which was when the dams could not give any more water when it dropped below the abstraction level. And that meant that a city of 4.5 million people would not have water. The emergency plan was that we would queue for water, and I don't know if anyone looked through the logistics of that, but it was incredibly stressful. So for me, during this time, two things happened. The one is that, you can imagine when you're in such a situation, every conversation is about water, and that was the foremost thing in my mind. That never went away. So I still think about water a lot. I'm very conscious of it, and I would love to see everyone being that conscious about our resources, the things that support us, in hopefully a much less stressful situation. Because I think being in that awareness is a beautiful experience. The second thing that happened was, as a researcher, I was sitting in knowledge groups, expert panels, rooms with policymakers, and we had no idea what we were doing. I don't think we had any plans. And people were asking us as researchers what to do, and we had grand 20-year plans for how we're going to fix this, but we didn't have a plan for what do we do if we run out of water in 2 weeks. We didn't have a plan that made sense to everyday people. And so I lost the last little bit of trust I had in authority and expertise. And this was very stressful. As a researcher myself, it dumped me in an existential crisis. And I mean, the crazy thing is that it's just getting worse. Climate change is not being handled well. Nobody in power is really doing anything, to be honest. The COVID pandemic was, I mean, come on, we crippled the whole world. And everyone just struggled, and we're still struggling, we're still recovering from that. And democracy itself seems to be in crisis. So, what are we doing? How? This is not working. So, this created like this huge crisis in me, and I started reading up about more like, what is it? Why is this happening? And I think the sort of general way of interpreting this is twofold. The one is that people are just stupid, and they're not believing the people that know what's going on, and we're just heading into an idiocracy, which is depressing. And the second thing is that expertise is changing, which is intriguing. So one of the good resources on this is this book by Jill Ale. And in the book, he unpacks what these causes are and what's happening, and try to think, why do people do this, in a sort of less harsh way. But one of the things he says is that the experts are playing politics. Then I found this article by a colleague of mine, Leslie, and she said that expertise discovers its limits when the predictables are no longer predictable. So that's the world that we live in at the moment. We don't know what's going on with our climate. It's just changing. And the economy is just in this weird place, and the global political powers are changing. So nothing is currently predictable. But on the other hand, expertise that is based on command and control, the experts telling us what to do, is based on the idea that expertise has no limits. But we just said that it's just run into its limits because we can't predict what's going on. So the bottom line is that top-down expertise does not work on its own anymore. But when Leslie wrote this article, she didn't consider it in a depressing way. She was positive. Like, it sounded like she knew about something better, like a better way of doing this. And so I was intrigued. Then I found this article by Lisa Stempnitsky. And instead of talking of a crisis of expertise, she talked about a transformation. She agreed with Ale that expertise is a social construct that is made of relationships, how we exchange knowledge, how we interpret it, what we do with it, what we advise. But she says that the relationships and connections, those knowledge alliances, what she calls them, are changing. And so if we as experts assume we know best and, swan around just saying, it's going to be like what we do, and then every time it doesn't happen that way, we break relationships. And so this challenges the notion that, people are stupid and they're heading into idiocracy. It's more saying us as experts perhaps need to regain that relationship and regain our touch with everybody else and ourselves as well. So this settled it for me. That's what I wanted to do. I want to facilitate those new knowledge alliances in a way that still maintains and perhaps re-establishes accountability to ourselves, to our laws, to democracy, and to the world, the natural world that supports us. So I want to do this in two ways. There's a social aspect to the project as well as a technical aspect, which just enables and empowers what we want to do socially. But those two connect very closely together. So it's people-centric rather than technocentric. So the social aspects, and coming from as an engineer and a technologist and a scientist, I don't really know what I'm doing. But this is what I've learned so far, and this is what I think could work, is in 4 components that I'll briefly explain in the following slides. Planning for playfulness, which is sort of like game design, open culture, visual power, and most importantly, curiosity. So planning for playfulness. Why? So this is what I mean with bringing in a sort of a game design, not gamification, but true deep game design into how we approach science and expertise. And the reason for that is that play creates possibilities. It allows us to imagine things that perhaps we can't really see in the day-to-day grind. Katriina Hiljaka in Finland is also inspiring, and her work talks about play as resistance. She looked at how we coped with a pandemic through play, for example. I'm particularly interested in emergent game design, and this is a sort of a fashionable way currently of how to do games that allow players to do their own stuff. And here there's 2 things of particular importance to me. The first is that we need to design these systems or whatever we're doing for all the player types, not just the well-behaved ones. When you design serious games or games for good or educational games, often they're like just for the good things. You know, you can explore, but you still have to do what we say. It's sort of patronizing. But what if you want to wreck stuff? I mean, if you can't, where's the fun in that? If I want to blow up the Eiffel Tower in my game, I should be able to. So I feel it's important to let everyone, play in the way that they would want to play, rather than being prescribed. And then I would like this sort of game design idea to be designing systems, and let the users generate content. Lastly, my another point is that when I was in this existential crisis, not sure if I belong as a researcher anymore, and like scared and confused by people not believing science and ridiculing us, and some people were saying that the drought wasn't even real. I also looked at game communities, people who were cosplaying or, having these thriving communities and a sense of belonging. And I was like, come on, I want that. How do we establish that sense of belonging and fun and community in scientific circles? And so how can play help facilitate knowledge alliances beyond gamification? Then I've spent the last 10 years or so volunteering in various guises and being involved in open source software. And so whether you want to call this do-it-yourself, open culture, open source, volunteering, tinkering, hacking, bottom-up, whatever, to me the group name for this or description is communities of choice. So rather than communities that you're sort of forced into because that's where you were born, or that's the religion your parents belong to, or this is the corporate environment, it's a community that's based around common interests. I think many of us feel that this is the ideal way, in principle, of how communities should work. And I think a lot of people feel like this is how democracy should truly work. But in my experience, it's also been very problematic in practice. And so while I'm inspired by open cultures, I also feel that I can contribute a good amount on critiquing, and perhaps we can help open cultures do better, as well as this idea of how open cultures could make expertise work better. Then visual power. I think science has not really cottoned on to how the visual can help us do stuff. So we started back in the day with tables, and this table comes from my thesis, where I was analyzing the amount of wastewaters that was in South Africa. And when you look at this table, you're like, oh, some numbers are bigger than others, and there's a lot of stuff, and you sort of know it's important, but you gloss over what it really says. Your brain sort of starts freezing up. So what I did with this table is converted it into a bar graph, and immediately you could see what a huge role municipal wastewater played in polluting, sending pollutants into the ecosystem, which I don't think we really understood that before. And so this was really important to my work. But if you're not an expert, you look at this graph and it's like, yeah, okay, there's something happening on the left and it's probably important, but there's nothing that tells you why you should be interested or to hook you into finding out more, into being curious. So then there's things like infographics, which has been a growing field in the last decade or two. And so in this picture, for example, it shows houses being next to a river that's being polluted by a mine. So when you look at this, you can start imagining, what if I lived in that house and saw this river changing color because of the pollutants? How would it affect me and, feeling safe in that environment? And so you can start connecting with what the image is trying to convey. By the way, as a scientist, I look at this and I go, where's the numbers? And so I think there's a lot that we can improve with images like this, and I think that's where data visualization could really develop. But it's a start. And then you can have animated infographics. For example, this is a visual GIF of how our dams were drying up, which was such a visceral reminder of what we were living through. The problem is that looking at all these things, there's still information being delivered to people from experts, and the people that receive it are expected to just believe it and just to accept it. There's no real two-way conversation about what should be contained and how this should be interpreted. What would it look like if we could visualize information in dynamic ways to enable collaboration, to enable conversation, to get people to be more curious? And so I think curiosity is the most important thing. So during this drought was also the first election of Donald Trump. And so there was a lot written about why people would choose someone like that. Why would they believe things that to some of us were just so obviously wrong? What were the motivations behind why they chose to believe that? And this struck a chord with me because some people in South Africa didn't believe that the drought was real. They thought it was a government conspiracy. And so I read up a lot about this. And Tim basically said curiosity brought people together in a way that mere facts did not. But his full quote is much more interesting. He said, scientifically literate people, remember, were more likely to be polarized in their answers to politically charged scientific questions. But scientifically curious people were not. Curiosity brought people together in a way that mere facts did not. So if I, as a scientist, are so passionate and so with full conviction about what is true, I'm not going to be able to convince people. I'm more likely to alienate them. I know when someone comes to me with some evangelical notice, I'm more likely to just walk away. But if you were curious, you could start a conversation and you could start to understand why people are believing whatever it is they're believing. And that might get you curious about, what do we have in common? But curiosity is a really hard thing too, especially when you're trying to talk about things that are very important to you. And trying to keep an open mind when someone have viewpoints that are so different to yours, as any family gatherings over Christmas can attest. So how do we help people cultivate curiosity? How do I get to step back my convictions and be more curious about how other people got to whatever conclusions they came to? So it's not about convincing people that what you're saying is true. It's about seeing where people come from and then perhaps finding common ground. So here I am inspired by Carol Gilligan, who writes about an ethic of care, and she talks about active ways of listening. The one thing that I really like about what she says is to suspend taboo, to replace judgment, you're wrong, you're stupid, with curiosity. Why do you say that? And to me, this is what play is. It's like improv. You'll always say yes, and. So how can we build tools and games to encourage this? So then the technical aspects. Our digital worlds have enabled so much innovation that I think there's a real promise here in how to build something that can help do this, facilitating new knowledge alliances. And I see it in 5 chunks. The first is open data provision. Secondly, structured data. A third, a platform to host this data. A tool, fourthly, to represent and visualize this data. And fifth, the most exciting for me, is providing tooling to potentially build games that makes use of this data. Now, these are not the metaverse, but it illustrates how we see the metaverse working. So then I guess it's time to talk about, well, what is the metaverse? But I'm not going to fall into that trap. I'm not going to get into an argument about what is the correct definition of the metaverse. I'm just going to say whatever you want it to be. For me, it's this emergent, playful, open thing that is built from layers of data. When I first learned about the metaverse, it was through this image by the Magicverse, where they showed the physical world and then all these layers of data that impact our lives overlain with it. And so in this way, you could have entertainment meshing with your water and energy infrastructure, meshing with your physical world and your transport, whatever you want. So that's my vision. Please add your vision at our fun self-interview on Discord in the OMI group that I'm part of, which is the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group. So back to the technical bits. Open data provision, I believe, is necessary because there's a lot of data that just doesn't work for everyday people. It's either at a resolution that is too high, like the whole city, but then when you zoom into your street, you just don't have the data that's relevant to your street and only your street. Or it's packaged in a way that's just not accessible. So it's like, for all intents and purposes, useless for you as an everyday person. With open data, I also distinguish between two different groupings. The one is the big open data infrastructures. So those are the big things, like in Europe, Copernicus or Emodnet, which is about the marine environment, and then globally, like OpenStreetMaps or Wikipedia. Then I also consider the smaller ones, which are called community data platforms. They're more private, more bounded and local, and so they're more relevant to the people who are in that little community. And so you don't have to worry about information that you would like to keep private in the community. There's a barrier between that and the international infrastructure. And then I wondered, in this sort of game design playfulness approach, could open data contributions be like user-generated content in games? Then sometimes, even though we have that data, it's taken prisoner in like a database, or in a database that you can't extract and use somewhere else easily. If you have structured data, however, suddenly things like AI, semantic web, collaboration, interoperability, the metaverse becomes possible. Having that data structured in little triples that show the relationships, paradoxically, allows that data to flow. Now, I don't understand much of it, but this has to do with the resource description framework. So if you want to look up more, then that's where you should go look. So then I want to use this data and build a platform that can allow verified data contributions through those CDPs, through a verification step, like I just said, into this platform that we can then use for other things. The platform is concerned about the data formats and the interoperability of that data. The platform allows integrations with other platforms, for example, with OpenStreetMap, Wikipedia, and these Copernicus that I mentioned before. I'm toying with the idea of calling this platform the Open Resource Map, or Open Water Map, or Open Water Canvas. The magic in this platform is its integrations. And so this is where I should introduce the industry of integrations, which uses a protocol called IPSME. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but IPSME was designed to transform gaming into a player-driven ecosystem as opposed to a corporate walled garden, to build and monetize integrations, and thereby bridging diverse platforms and dissolving sandbox boundaries. Then I thought, could we use this for science? Could IOI for science be designed to transform expertise into a citizen-driven ecosystem, rather than just those few elites at the top, to build and monetize integrations, and thereby bridging diverse scientific silos to dissolve expertise boundaries? I think that sounds promising. So then this platform can be used to develop all sorts of things like tools. So representing the data and visualizing the data to be relevant for everyday people. Now, I don't know what this would look like. I imagine it would look in different ways depending on what specific communities would need. Okay. But then most excitedly, one could use this platform to develop tooling to bring physical world elements into games. So where the landscape in the physical world is not just a backdrop to build a game on top of, but actual things to interact with while we're in the game. The way that I see that, obviously there's many different ways one could build this, but I would like to see a Godus-like game, which is where the screenshot comes from, but with a physical world, so that you can build and dig, and if you want to blow up the Eiffel Tower, you could just really play with our world. Then there's the big picture as well. Could we use all of these things, perhaps, to create a transformed society? Could we create citizen player-driven ecosystems to build and monetize integrations that bridges diverse expert, scientist, political, geographic silos, and as well as game platforms, thereby dissolving all sorts of boundaries? Can you imagine what magic could emerge then? So that's the talk. What we're busy with at the moment, we're in the final stages of applying for a research proposal that, if successful, will allow us to prototype the first version of this tool. It's focused on water and trying to make modern water systems more visible. That doesn't just mean that the pipes are mostly underground. It's also about that a lot of the data has become corporatized and so is not available to the people that it impacts. That data is also complex and constantly changing. You can imagine there's water quality measures, water can be dirty or cleaner. The seasons change, so the volumes can change and go up and down. So what we hope to build is a visual, interactive, web-based platform and tool to highlight and explore these challenges. We hope to build a people-centric digital twin, although it's a tool. I don't know if it will look like a digital twin eventually, and build this through a water-focused lens. We will have 2 case studies, one in Uru, Denmark and Bursa, Turkey, but there's also a global use of the tool that we will encourage, as well as a competition. So there is collaboration potential if you're interested. So this is just an image to show how I see the things fitting together. So we have the platform in the core of the project, which can take in data from the open data infrastructures through these integrations. And then the integrations can also build the tooling into casual games. One of these applications is the tool that creates data visualizations, and then it will also carry the competition. And then from the other side, data can be contributed through the community data platforms, through structured data streams, as well as a privacy filter, so that the data that's relevant to this community can stay private where relevant and not be shared into the platform if that's not required. So next, I am, as I said, looking for a home for this project as a postdoc. And I would also like to apply for one more project that explores the tool more in its creative side rather than this more explicitly science-based focus. And so I'd like to build a consortium and get some funding for that. So if any of that interests you, you can email me, or I'm IndieBio on the social. So Discord, Twitter, Blue Sky, Mastodon, IndieBio everywhere. So thank you very much.